night Wembanyama found out, Cat was not afraid. The NBA expected Victor Wembanyama to walk into the finals like a storm no one could survive. But through 2 games, the biggest shock is not Wembanyama's dominance. It is Karl-Anthony Towns standing chest to chest with him, refusing to move, refusing to blink, and forcing the entire basketball world to ask one uncomfortable question: has KAT become the one big man Victor cannot control? This was not supposed to be the story. Wembanyama arrived as the future of basketball, the giant with guard skills, the defensive monster, the player coaches build nightmares around. Every drive into the paint was supposed to end with fear. Every shot near the rim was supposed to feel impossible. But Towns did something different. He did not run from the matchup. He attacked it. He bumped Wemby early. He dragged him away from the rim. He punished smaller defenders. He crashed the glass like every rebound belonged to him. And when San Antonio thought their size would break New York, Cat turned his own body into a weapon of control, balance, and pressure. Now, Spurs coach Mitch Johnson is watching the tape, answering questions, and trying to find a way to make life harder for Towns before this series slips away completely. Because right now, the Knicks are not just winning games. They are winning the physical argument. And that is what makes this finals so dangerous for San Antonio. If Wembanyama cannot punish Towns for playing this aggressive, the entire Spurs system starts to shake. Their rim protection changes, their spacing changes, their confidence changes. So before we go deeper, comment where you are watching from. If you believe KAT is playing clean, press 1. If you think he is crossing the line, press 2. And if you want more NBA Finals breakdowns like this, subscribe now, because this series is only getting hotter. The hit that followed both men to the finals. Long before the finals became a national obsession, the warning sign was already there. It happened in March, inside Madison Square Garden, during a regular season clash that suddenly felt much bigger than the schedule said. Karl-Anthony Towns caught the ball on the perimeter with Victor Wembanyama in front of him. The crowd leaned in. Everyone expected a jumper, maybe a pass, maybe a slow reset. Instead, Towns lowered his shoulder, leaned into Wembanyama's chest, and the 7'4" superstar hit the floor. The whistle came fast. Offensive foul. But Towns did not react like a guilty man. He turned toward the Knicks bench, pointed at Wembanyama's massive frame, and laughed like the call made no sense. To KAT, this was simple. How could a player that tall, that long, that physically gifted go down so easily? The internet exploded. Some fans said Wembanyama was selling contact. Others said Towns clearly drove his shoulder through him. Within minutes, the clip became more than a play. It became evidence. It became a debate. It became the first chapter of a much bigger war. And the strange part? The Knicks won big that night. Wembanyama had the better individual numbers, but Towns left with the result, the reaction, and the psychological edge. That moment followed them into June. Coaches studied it. Fans replayed it. Analysts circled it. Because hidden inside that one collision was the question that would define the finals. Could Towns use strength, leverage, and attitude to disturb the most unique player in basketball? By the time New York and San Antonio met again on the biggest stage, that March collision was no longer just a viral clip. It was a message. KAT had already shown the Spurs he was willing to hit first. When one collision became New York's secret weapon, what looked like one controversial regular season collision slowly became something much bigger for the New York Knicks. At first, fans treated it like a viral moment. Karl-Anthony Towns lowered his shoulder, Victor Wembanyama hit the floor, the whistle blew, and the internet immediately split into 2 sides. One side said Wembanyama was selling the contact, the other side said Towns had crossed the line. But inside NBA film rooms, that play was not being watched for entertainment. It was being studied. Because hidden inside that single collision was a truth most teams were afraid to test. Wembanyama could be made uncomfortable if you attacked his body before attacking his length. For most of the season, opponents treated Victor like a defensive wall. Guards turned away from the rim the moment they saw him. Big men rushed shots. Wings floated awkward layups just to avoid his reach. His presence alone changed decisions before he even jumped. But Towns did not play scared. He did not treat Wembanyama like a ghost story waiting under the rim. He treated him like another body that had to absorb contact, fight for position, and survive a long physical night. That changed everything. The Knicks began to understand that beating San Antonio was not only about making shots, it was about moving Wembanyama out of the places where he felt most powerful. If Victor was standing near the basket, he controlled the game. If he was pulled toward the perimeter, forced to close out, forced to defend Towns in space, the entire Spurs defense began to look different. That was the secret. Towns was not just scoring. He was rearranging the floor. Every time KAT spaced out to the three-point line, Wembanyama had a decision to make. Stay back and risk giving up a clean shot, or step out and leave the paint exposed. Every time Towns drove into his chest, Victor had to choose between challenging the play and risking a foul. Every time KAT crashed the glass, San Antonio had to send extra bodies, which opened gaps for New York's guards. Suddenly, the Knicks were not simply attacking Wembanyama. They were attacking the structure built around him. That is why this matchup became so dangerous for the Spurs. Their identity depended on Victor being the safety net. He erased mistakes, he scared drivers, he made ordinary defensive possessions feel impossible for opponents. But Towns was forcing him into a different kind of battle. Not a highlight battle, not a shot blocking battle, but a strength and position battle. And that is the type of battle that can wear on a young superstar. KAT knew exactly what people had said about him for years. Too soft, too emotional, too easy to frustrate, not built for the biggest stage. But now, under the brightest lights in basketball, he was flipping that reputation into a weapon. He was the one initiating contact. He was the one making the defense react. He was the one forcing San Antonio to adjust. By the time the finals arrived, that March collision no longer felt like an accident. It felt like a preview, a warning, a message that New York had found something real. And once the Knicks realized Towns could make Wembanyama uncomfortable, the series stopped being just about talent. It became about pressure. It became about endurance. It became about whether the future face of the league could handle a veteran big man who refused to give him space, refused to fear his reach, and refused to let San Antonio control the terms of the fight. That was the blueprint. And in Game 1, New York was ready to use it. The weight on Wembanyama's shoulders? Victor Wembanyama did not walk into the 2026 NBA Finals as just another superstar. He walked in as the future of basketball. Everywhere he went, that label followed him. The impossible wingspan, the guard-like handle, the soft shooting touch, the defensive range that made normal NBA players look like they were second-guessing themselves before they even left the floor. For most of the playoffs, Wembanyama had looked like the kind of player who could bend an entire series with his presence alone. That is why the pressure was enormous. Because when the basketball world calls you generational, people do not just expect good numbers. They expect control. They expect dominance. They expect you to solve every problem in real time, no matter how complicated the opponent makes it. And New York was determined to make it complicated. The Knicks were not trying to out-hype Wembanyama. They were not trying to win a highlight contest. They were trying to drag him into uncomfortable basketball. They wanted him away from the rim, fighting through bodies, absorbing bumps, chasing Towns into space, and making decisions under constant pressure. For Victor, that changed the emotional weight of the series. This was no longer just about scoring, rebounding, or blocking shots. This was about proving he could stay calm when a veteran big man refused to respect his aura. It was about proving he could punish contact without rushing. It was about showing that even when the game got physical, he could still control the floor. That is the cruel part of the finals. They do not only test your talent, they test your patience, they test your habits. They test whether your greatest strength can become predictable when an opponent studies it long enough. And through the first 2 games, Towns made Wembanyama feel that test on every possession. Every bump became a message. Every rebound battle became personal. Every time Victor stepped away from the paint, New York found more room to breathe. The Spurs still had the most unique player in basketball, but the Knicks were beginning to make him look human. That was the real shock. Not that Wembanyama struggled at moments. Every great player struggles. The shock was that Towns, the player so many people once called too soft for this stage, was the one applying the pressure. Now, the series was no longer asking whether Victor was special. Everyone already knew he was. The question became much harder. Could he adjust fast enough before Karl-Anthony Towns turned his first finals into a lesson? How Towns turned Wembanyama's greatest strength into a problem. The genius of Karl-Anthony Towns in this series is not only that he is scoring, it is where he is making Victor Wembanyama stand. For San Antonio, Wembanyama's greatest power is his ability to protect the rim. When he is near the basket, the whole game changes. Guards hesitate. Wings pull the ball back. Big men rush shots they normally finish. He does not have to block every attempt to dominate. Sometimes, just being there is enough. But Towns attacked that power at its source. He dragged Wembanyama away from the paint. Every time Cat floated out to the three-point line, the Spurs had a problem. If Victor stayed near the rim, Towns could punish him with open threes. If Victor stepped out, New York suddenly had space behind him. That one decision began to bend San Antonio's entire defensive structure. This is why Towns became such a nightmare matchup. He is too skilled to ignore outside, too strong to switch small defenders onto, and too smart to let the defense relax. He was not just playing center, he was playing chess with the Spurs' most important piece. And the Knicks understood it perfectly. They used Towns to pull Wembanyama out of his comfort zone. They put him in actions where Victor had to move laterally, close out, recover, and then still be ready to protect the rim. That is exhausting basketball. It turns a shot blocker into a decision maker. It turns instinct into hesitation. On the other end, Towns made the matchup even more physical. He leaned into Wembanyama. He fought for rebounding position. He used his lower body to hold ground. He made Victor feel contact before he could rise, reach, or extend. That is not dirty basketball. That is veteran basketball. The problem for San Antonio is that it forced Wembanyama into a new kind of test. He was no longer simply waiting at the rim to erase mistakes. He had to battle early in possessions, then recover late. He had to protect himself from fouls while still playing with force. He had to prove he could dominate even when the opponent controlled the spacing. And through the first stretch of the finals, Towns was winning that control battle. That is why Mitch Johnson had to be concerned. Because if Wembanyama cannot stay near the rim, the Spurs lose the foundation of their defense. If he steps out, Brunson has lanes. If he stays back, Towns has shots. If San Antonio sends help, New York has passing angles. KAT was not just hurting Victor. He was forcing the Spurs to choose which problem they wanted to live with. That is what makes this series so dangerous. A superstar can survive a bad shooting night. A team can survive a tough whistle. But when your entire defensive identity is being pulled apart possession by possession, panic starts to creep in, and Towns could feel it. Every rebound, every bump, every drive, every calm decision made the message clearer. New York had found the pressure point, and Karl-Anthony Towns was pressing it again and again. Game 1. The Nightcat stole the moment. Game 1 began exactly the way San Antonio wanted. The Frostbank Center was loud, confident, and ready for a Wembanyama statement. The Spurs were at home. Their young superstar had the crowd behind him, and for a while, it looked like New York was about to get overwhelmed by the moment. The Knicks' offense was messy. Jalen Brunson was dealing with pressure, traps, and physical defense. New York's spacing looked uncomfortable. San Antonio kept pushing the pace, kept attacking gaps, and kept making the game feel faster than the Knicks wanted. Then the Spurs made their run. A 20-3 burst changed the entire mood of the arena. Suddenly, San Antonio was up double digits. The crowd got louder, the bench got louder. Every Wembanyama contest felt like a warning. Every Knicks miss felt heavier than the last. By the third quarter, the lead had grown to 14. That was the moment when many teams would have started fading. But Karl-Anthony Towns did not fade. He slowed the game down. He stopped trying to make the perfect play and started making the strongest play. When Wembanyama was off the floor, Towns attacked immediately. He found cutters. He punished weaker matchups. He drove through contact. He grabbed offensive rebounds that San Antonio thought were already secure. Then Victor came back in, and Towns did not change. That was the part that mattered most. Cat was not only dominating backups, he was carrying that same physical attitude into the minutes that mattered. He crashed into the paint, fought for position, and forced the Spurs to feel him on every possession. A 14-point lead started shrinking fast. 14 became 10, 10 became 6, 6 became 2. Suddenly, the building that had sounded like a celebration started to feel nervous, and Towns was the reason. This was not the old version of KAT floating around the perimeter, waiting for the game to come to him. This was a stronger, sharper, more committed version. He was not begging for whistles. He was not letting missed calls ruin his rhythm. He was playing through bodies and turning contact into control. On defense, he made Wembanyama work for everything. He did not give Victor easy angles. He crowded his space. He used his strength before Wemby could fully extend. He made the young superstar take uncomfortable shots and make rush decisions. That changed the story of the night. The Knicks did not just steal Game 1. They stole belief. They proved San Antonio's home court could be silenced. They proved Wembanyama could be bothered. And most importantly, they proved Karl-Anthony Towns could be the physical force everyone once doubted he would become. When the final buzzer sounded, New York had a 105-95 win, but the score was only part of the damage. The bigger damage was psychological, because now the Spurs had to go back to the film and answer a question they did not expect to face this early. What happens if the most important matchup in this series does not belong to Wembanyama? What happens if it belongs to Towns? Physical or too far? The question that took over the finals after Game 1, the basketball world stopped talking about the Knicks as a lucky road team. Now everyone was talking about Karl-Anthony Towns, not just his points, not just his rebounds, not just the way he helped New York steal home court. The real debate was about how he did it. Was Cat playing tough, veteran, championship basketball, or was he crossing the line with Victor Wembanyama? That question spread everywhere because the matchup was so unusual. Wembanyama is not built like a normal big man. His arms are longer, his release point is higher, and his defensive reach changes the geometry of the court. But that also means every bit of contact looks bigger. Every bump looks dramatic. Every fall becomes a replay. Every whistle becomes a national argument. And Towns understood the risk. He knew the referees were watching. He knew San Antonio wanted foul trouble. He knew Wembanyama could draw contact and turn aggression against him. But Cat also knew something else. If he backed off, Victor would own the paint again. So Towns kept walking the line. He leaned into him early. He fought for position before the catch. He made Wembanyama feel weight on every drive, every seal, every rebound. He did not give him a clean runway. He did not let him float freely into blocks and highlight plays. That is what made the Spurs uncomfortable, because Towns was not reckless enough to be easily punished, but he was physical enough to change the rhythm of the series. That is the hardest kind of opponent to deal with. A reckless player gives you mistakes. A soft player gives you space. But a disciplined physical player gives you problems, possession after possession. For years, critics said Towns did not use his size enough. They said he complained too much, floated too much, and let smaller, tougher players push him out of games. Now, on the biggest stage, he was finally doing what people had begged him to do. And some of those same people were asking if it was too much. That irony made the story even louder. The truth is, finals basketball has always lived near the edge. Not dirty, not dangerous, but intense. Every cut is harder. Every screen hits strong. Every rebound has bodies crashing from both sides. The officials can call the game tight, or they can let stars decide it. Either way, both teams must adjust. New York adjusted first. San Antonio was still searching, and as long as the Spurs were searching, Towns had the advantage. He had turned the conversation away from Wembanyama's greatness and toward Wembanyama's discomfort. That alone was a victory, because once a superstar starts thinking about contact before the play even develops, the defense has already won part of the possession. By the time Game 2 arrived, the stakes were clear. Wembanyama needed a response. Towns needed to prove Game 1 was not a fluke. And the referees needed to decide how much physicality they were willing to allow before this matchup became the defining war of the finals. Game 2. When Wembanyama hit back, but Cat did not move. Game 2 opened with San Antonio carrying more than pressure. They were carrying danger. Going down 0-2 at home in the NBA Finals is not just a bad start. It can feel like a sentence. The Spurs knew they could not fly to Madison Square Garden, needing to win 4 of the next 5, while New York's confidence was growing by the minute. So Wembanyama came out looking for a response, and he found one early. He caught the ball near the paint, saw the defense collapse, and exploded toward the rim. OG Anunoby was there, Towns rotated over, but Victor rose above both of them and hammered home a left-handed dunk that shook the building. For a second, it felt like the series had shifted. That was the kind of play San Antonio needed. Loud, violent in energy, not intent, emotional. A reminder that Wembanyama was still the most terrifying physical talent on the court, but the problem was simple. Towns did not react like a man who had been warned. He reacted like a man who had expected it. KAT kept playing through the same pressure points. He spaced the floor. He attacked closeouts. He fought for rebounds. He put his body on Wembanyama and forced every possession to feel heavy. And even when foul trouble became a real concern, Towns still found ways to affect the game. He scored efficiently, moved the ball, and gave New York the physical balance they needed while Brunson struggled to control every possession. That was what made Game 2 so painful for San Antonio. Wembanyama had the highlight. Towns had the control. Cat finished with the kind of performance that does not always look flashy in a short clip, but destroys a coaching staff on film. He was efficient, strong, calm, and constantly involved in the plays that mattered. Then came the final mistake. Late in the game, Wembanyama grabbed a rebound and tried to push the ball ahead quickly, but the pass was not clean. The ball hit Stephon Castle, New York recovered, and the Knicks took advantage at the line. On the final Spurs possession, Victor got a decent look. It missed. The buzzer sounded, Knicks 105, Spurs 104. New York was leaving San Antonio up 2-0, and suddenly, the finals had a new headline. This was no longer about whether Wembanyama could deliver one spectacular moment. He already had. This was about whether he could solve 48 minutes of Karl-Anthony Towns, making him uncomfortable. Mitch Johnson's problem is bigger than one matchup. After Game 2, Mitch Johnson could not pretend this was just about one bad possession, one missed jumper, or one unlucky bounce. The Spurs had a real problem, and the problem had a name: Karl-Anthony Towns. Through 2 games, Towns had done more than score. He had pulled San Antonio's defense out of shape. He had taken Wembanyama away from the rim. He had forced the Spurs into uncomfortable choices. And worst of all, he had made New York look like the calmer, stronger, more prepared team. That is why Johnson's message mattered. When he said the Spurs had to make it tougher on Towns, it was not just a normal coach quote. It was a public admission that New York had found the pressure point in San Antonio's system. Because if Wembanyama stays near the basket, Towns can shoot. If Wembanyama steps out, Brunson gets lanes. If the Spurs switch, Towns can punish smaller defenders. If they help, New York can move the ball. Every answer creates another question. That is how a matchup becomes a crisis. Now, Johnson has to solve two battles at once. He has to protect Wembanyama from being dragged into foul trouble, but he also has to let Victor play with enough force to punish Towns. He has to keep the rim protected, but he cannot ignore KAT on the perimeter. He has to adjust, but he cannot overreact and break the identity that carried San Antonio this fall. That is the nightmare of the final. There are no easy fixes. The Knicks are going back to Madison Square Garden up 2-0, and the emotional weight of the series has completely changed. New York is no longer hoping it can compete. New York believes it can control the matchup. And San Antonio is no longer just chasing win. They are chasing answers. Wembanyama said the Spurs had not played their best basketball yet. Maybe he is right. Maybe the series still has another turn waiting. But right now, the Knicks have forced the Spurs into a place no team wants to be in June, needing to adjust under pressure on the road, while the opponent already believes it has found your weakness. That is why Game 3 will not just be another finals game. It will be a test of response. Can Johnson find a way to free Wembanyama without exposing the paint? Can Victor punish Towns physically without losing patience? Can the Spurs regain their identity before New York turns confidence into control? Because if they cannot, this series may be remembered as the moment Karl-Anthony Towns stopped being the criticized star people doubted and became the veteran big man who shook the future of the NBA. The lesson behind the battle: what makes this finals matchup so powerful is that it is not only about size, skill, or star power. It is about adjustment. Victor Wembanyama is still the future. Nothing about these first two games changes that. He is still rare, still brilliant, still capable of becoming the kind of player who defines an era, but even the most gifted players eventually meet a moment that forces them to grow faster than expected. For Wembanyama, that moment is Karl-Anthony Towns. Towns has shown that reputation can change when a player accepts the hardest challenge in front of him. For years, people questioned his toughness, his focus, and his ability to dominate when the stage got bigger. But in this series, he has answered with his body, his patience, his rebounding, his spacing, and his willingness to play through pressure. That is the lesson. Greatness is not just talent. Greatness is adaptation. The Knicks adapted first. They found a way to move Wembanyama away from his strongest position. They trusted Towns to be physical without losing control. They turned one matchup into a full team advantage. Now the Spurs must respond with the same maturity. Not with panic, not with frustration, not with reckless contact. They need discipline, patience, better spacing, and trust. Wembanyama does not need to prove everything in one possession. He needs to read the game, stay calm, and grow through the pressure. That is what champions do. They do not run from hard lessons. They absorb them, and whether this series ends with New York finishing the job or San Antonio finding a way back, this battle will matter for years. Because it has shown us something honest about basketball and life. Pressure does not destroy everyone. Sometimes, pressure reveals who is ready to become stronger. So now, I want to hear from you. If you think KAT has been the best player in this finals, press 1. If you believe Wembanyama will still turn the series around, press 2. If you think the Knicks are already in control, press 3. And if you love deep NBA stories like this, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, share this video with another basketball fan, and comment where you are watching from. The finals are not just about who wins the trophy. They are about who survives the lesson.